Hey everyone, one of the worst trends of our time is the rise of right-wing anti-Americanism like this.
Unconditional surrender means foreign troops get to rape your wife and daughter if they want. And everyone knows that.
I'm Rich Lowry of National Review, and of course, that was Tucker Carlson. They're talking about why Trump's call for an unconditional surrender on the part of the Iranians is such a terrible thing. Now, to talk about this, mass rape carried out by a military force in the American context is insane and disgraceful. Now, as we'll see, he subsequently walks a little bit of it back, but you only talk in these terms if you don't know what country you're living in or actually don't care that much for your country anymore at the end of the day because you think it is guilty potentially of the worst sort of crimes. Let's break it down. Here's more from Tucker.
If there's one consistent lesson of history, it means unconditional surrender means foreign troops get to rape your wife and daughter. Everyone can feel that. That's like the most atavistic instinct there is. And so to avoid that, people will do anything. And so that's why it requires that level of force to get a population subdued to the point of unconditional surrender. That's why.
Now, when it comes to the entire sweep of human history, Tucker is, of course, correct, with the important caveat that the American military has always been different and is different particularly today. This is the most powerful and lawful military force in the history of the planet. But let's go back to World War II. We demand unconditional surrender. We get it from the Japanese. We occupy Japan. By Tucker's calculus, this should have resulted in the worst sort of atrocities and war crimes and crimes of sexual violence imaginable carried out by these American GIs who could work their will. Did it happen? No. Of course it didn't. This is from a Princeton dissertation published 10 years ago or so. It says, much recent writing on the occupation of Japan has challenged the traditional picture of a well-disciplined American army, laying the groundwork for Japan's transition to democracy by the example of its behavior. Instead, it depicts the occupation, especially in its opening phase, as marred by the widespread rape of Japanese women by American servicemen. In addition, many writers claim the United States encouraged, requested, or even ordered the Japanese government to establish brothels for its troops. Copious documentation of American behavior from both Japanese and American sources does not support such claims. Rather, it makes very clear that though there were a fair number of reported rapes of Japanese women by American and other Allied servicemen, stories of mass rape during any period of the occupation, including its opening phase, are simply not credible. In addition, the contemporary record suggests that American authorities regarded prostitution not as a benefit for the troops, but as an entrenched social problem, which they tolerated reluctantly. Of course, it was Japanese troops that engaged in widespread rape and other atrocities in China. Look up the Nanking Massacre, for instance, if you can stomach it. How about Germany? By the end of World War II, there are 1.6 million American servicemen in Germany that was being completely destroyed as we were imposing unconditional surrender on it. According to Tucker, this must have resulted in American GIs just raping wherever they went. The historical consensus, obviously, is that this is not true, although there's been some revisionist work, especially by a woman named Miriam Gebhardt, that's claimed there are more American rapes than we've been led to believe. She comes up with a shocking figure of nearly 200,000 rapes carried out by American troops in Germany at the end of World War II. Is this plausible? No, it's not. The German publication Der Spiegel had an article about her book titled Were Americans as Bad as the Soviets? It says of her finding, quote, such a total, though, hardly seems plausible. Were the number really that high, it is almost certain that there would be more reports on rape in the files of hospitals or health authorities, or that there would be more eyewitness reports. Gebhardt is unable to present such evidence in sufficient quantity. Of course, it was the Russian army that was a rape machine in Germany, committing up to, according to some estimates, 2 million rapes. Some people think this is the worst episode of mass rape in history. This, again, was Russia, a country of which Tucker Carlson is very fond and tends to make excuses for its government. By the way, the Russian army has been performing to its typical standards in Ukraine, where it's also been incredibly brutal. But let's go back to the United States. We had long wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. Were U.S. troops systematically raping the civilian population that were under their control in those two countries? No, of course not. This doesn't mean that terrible things didn't happen. There was an awful incident where U.S. troops in 2006 gang raped a girl, murdered most of her family. They're all in prison or died in prison. Look at Alan West, right? He intimidated Iraqi policemen who he believed was in on a potential ambush of our troops, didn't physically harm him in a serious way, did carry out a mock execution, not something that should happen. What happens to him? Well, his career effectively ends because U.S. society is different than other societies. We really care about the rules and lawfulness, and the U.S. military, in many ways, is the highest expression of our society. So to claim, based on this hypothetical, that if our troops were in Iran getting an unconditional surrender, they would automatically carry out mass war crimes is a slander against our troops and against our own society. Now, Tucker, in this riff, piled speculation upon speculation. Here's some more.
And so in this case, of course, we don't have the ground force necessary. I don't think Americans would voluntarily participate in it. I just don't think we can do that. It would require weapons of mass destruction. It would require presumably nuclear weapons in order to do that. And let's not lie to ourselves. We're moving toward that.
All right, so a couple things about this. One, when I first listened to this clip, I thought, oh, Tucker's saying U.S. troops wouldn't participate in mass rape if they invaded Iran. And maybe he's just saying they wouldn't participate in an invasion of Iran. But anyway, he's building these lurid sandcastles in the air based on Trump calling for unconditional surrender. Well, one, there's a strong likelihood that Trump is just doing that in order to gain more leverage and try to scare the Iranian regime. This is often a tactic of his. Even if he's more serious about it, he's probably talking about unconditional surrender to comply with his demands, ending the nuclear program, ending the missile program, ending the regime's support for anti-American proxy forces across the Middle East. But Tucker skips all through this and says it's going to take a massive ground invasion in order to subdue Iran. And since that's not in the offing, you know what? We got to nuke Iran. By the way, another flaw in all this hypothetical reasoning that Carlson is engaged in is that in Iran, we're basically talking about a pro-American population. So I don't think would be a situation like Okinawa, where the Japanese convince the civilian population that there's no alternative to suicide, mass suicide, if they're going to avoid these evil Americans. I don't think that's what we'd see in Iran. But anyway, we're not talking about a mass ground invasion of Iran, but Tucker goes to the scenario where the President of the United States drops nuclear weapons on Iran, killing hundreds of thousands of people. Now, if Tucker thinks all these things are true, the logical conclusion is that Donald Trump is a dangerous moral monster. He's the one behind these policies. He's the one who started this war. He's the one who's supposedly going to end it by nuking Tehran. But since Tucker still has a relationship with Trump, because his audience likes Trump, he's not willing to go there or say that. So instead, he elides that and tends to blame other forces. Bibi's forced Trump into it. Chabad is behind it. The Jews are behind it. But he's still making these statements about his own country, which is dangerous, which is a terrible risk to stability and peace, and is deeply inhumane and capable of the worst sort of crimes that you can imagine. He is saying that about the United States of America. We're used to the left believing such things about its own country for 50 years or more, but it's a relatively new phenomenon to have voices on the right saying the same thing. And thanks to figures like Tucker Carlson, right-wing anti-Americanism is now very much a thing and is just as disgraceful, by the way, as a left-wing version. I'm Rich Lowry, over and out.